Welcome back. All right, first things first. This is a starter jersey. It's a fashion jersey. They had fashion jerseys back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they did color schemes that teams didn't actually wear. There's also a nice baby blue version of this one as well. But I like the black one, and again, it shows Detroit could do well with a black jersey. Just throwing that out there. But again, fashion jersey over 20 years ago, and of course, I got this used off eBay. So there you go. All right, so I want to talk about new players on new teams. And I had debated about whether or not to talk about players who came in at the deadline, players who were going into a first full season with a new team, but there weren't a lot of options there. So I will be looking at players like Filip Hronek, like Jakob Chychrun, these kinds. But for this video, it's players who are on new teams. And it's 31 players on 32 teams because I wanted to get Vegas out of the way first. Vegas does not have a notable addition to the roster when you're looking at players who have come in from other organizations. A team that's up against the cap and a team that just won the Stanley Cup, maybe they don't need anybody new on the team. Of course, they've lost Riley Smith, but they kept Barbashev, and Dorofeyev's probably going to get some more ice time this year. Based on what I've been seeing online and just hearing when it comes to Vegas talk, I think Dorofeyev's being underrated a little bit, but that's me. All right, so starting off with Vancouver. So what's interesting is Pius Suter last year had 24 points. Now the Hockey News does not have a ranking for him. They don't rank his points at all, and it's an interesting one. I'll say with Suter, I think he'll end up, because he's going to be a third-line center in Vancouver, I'll say 32 points for Suter. I think that's quite possible. Vancouver's going to want to score from the first to the third. They're going to want three scoring lines, right? And so I think Suter's going to get every opportunity. Again, he had 24 points last year. Vancouver, I think, will score more goals than Detroit. Doesn't necessarily mean winning more games, but when you're doing fantasy hockey, I think, points and goals are usually the more important part, not whether or not he's on a winning team. For Seattle, so I've done this by division. So this is one of those interesting ones out of the newbies because Kyler Yamamoto last year had 25 points. Now the Hockey News says 32 for Yamamoto. I'm going to be a little more optimistic. I'm going to say 40 points for Yamamoto. New organization, still a young player, and I still think he's capable of producing, I would say, a point every other game. I'll say 40 points, 80 games. That sounds about right. I don't think he's going to end up necessarily hitting 50, 60 points. He can. I think he showed in Edmonton over his time there that he can be frustrating to watch, can be a lot of fun to watch at times, and maybe in Seattle it turns around. But I would say Yamamoto at 40 is more of the ballpark I'd be going for there. Then with San Jose, I had to go with a goaltender. Because if you're looking for who the big addition was, and then if the question is, well, what do you use as your marker? Well, very often it's wins with goaltenders. Now, last year he had 10 wins for the Devils. Didn't play that many games. He's projected to get 17 wins by the Hockey News. I'm not as optimistic necessarily. I'm gonna say 15. Personally, I would say 15 because we know San Jose is not going to win a lot. I don't think Blackwood's going to play more than about 50 games. And again, you have the injury concern with Blackwood too, just over the last few years. So I'll say 15 wins for Blackwood with a new environment and all of that. But of course, Kakinen's there too. And so I would expect them to pretty much split it down the middle. We'll see. For the LA Kings, this one kind of surprised me when I was looking at their projections. So Pierre-Luc Dubois, there's a great amount of discussion about whether or not he's overrated. Now, last year he had 63 points. And the Hockey News goes out on a limb and projects 63 points for him again this year. I'm a little more gung-ho, I guess, on Dubois. I'll say 68. I think Dubois is capable of getting closer to a point per game, and I'll say 68 points. I think his totals should go up. LA will give him every opportunity to succeed after signing that big contract with them. I think 68 points for Dubois, and I think it'll probably go up a little bit. Kopitar's numbers in terms of his ice time and everything will start coming down a bit, and Dubois will probably end up getting a lot of that ice time and opportunity. For Edmonton picking up a guy that I've been a fan of for years. He only played 4 games last year, recorded no points for the Washington Capitals. Connor Brown's projected for 47 points this year. that feels high, and yet, I mean, I'm going to be close. I'll go with 42 points for Connor Brown. And not just because that's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I know I might be dating myself with that reference. But yeah, for Connor Brown, I'll say 42. So, again, probably about a point per game, or point every other game. He's capable of more than that. He's capable of 50, 55. It all depends on how the chemistry works. And that's the question mark, of course, when you're looking at new players, is if you can figure out, okay, I think these guys will have really good chemistry and it works, you can end up in a really good spot from the fantasy side of things. So, of course, I have to write out the full name now because I started it that way. So that's on me. Although I guess the other option would have been just to write his first name. But Yegor Sharangovich. So Yegor Sharangovich last year had 30 points. The Hockey News projects him to hit 36. I'm going to say that Sharangovich will get every opportunity to succeed. I'm going to say 40 for Sharangovich. Now, that is a very sunshiny, bright, projection. He may end up short of that, but I do think 20 goals, 20 assists, he is capable of producing that. He'll probably get more ice time with Calgary than he would get with New Jersey Devils. And with the fact that Toffoli's out, there's room there for somebody to score some goals, both on special teams and just regularly at 5-on-5. He's a hardworking forward. If he can get some chemistry with maybe a Mangiapane on the same line, that kind of thing, I do think 40 points for Sharangovich is quite possible. And then Anaheim, so rounding out the Pacific Division portion of this video, Alex Killorn, who last year had 64 points. And so 53 points is where the Hockey News thinks he's going to end up. See, and this is where it gets difficult too, because Killorn's going to get more ice time with Anaheim, but Anaheim's going to score a lot less than Tampa does, right? So Killorn may get more ice time and may score at a lower rate than he did. This is why I don't get into the goals per 60 and points per 60 for these. Because especially when you're switching teams, the math changes. It changes substantially. I don't know. 53 points to me sounds high. So I'm going to go lower. I'll say 47 for Killorn because it's Anaheim. If Killorn was staying in Tampa Bay, it'd be closer to 60. So, all right, that rounds out that division. Winnipeg. Now, people know I'm a Gabe Vilardi fan, right? Gabe Vilardi had 41 points last year. He's projected for 54 by the Hockey News. It's probably about right. But again, I'm a Vilardi fan. I'm going to say he gets 60 over a full season with Winnipeg, because why not? Vilardi should be able to score at least, I would say, 30 goals this year. He scored at a pretty good rate for LA. I think in Winnipeg, he's going to get more of an opportunity to score goals. Again, with Dubois gone, I think Vilardi's capable of scoring about 60 points. I do, and we'll see, right? Because last year was only 41, so going up to 60, that's quite the jump. But he's at the age where we do see guys jumping in production. For St. Louis, the new player is Kevin Hayes. He comes over from Philadelphia. It happened eventually. So last year, Kevin Hayes had 54 points. The Hockey News projecting 50 for Hayes. I'm gonna be a negative Nancy on this and say 48. I'll go 2 points lower. I'll say for Kevin Hayes 48. St. Louis, of course, bit of a transition for them. We'll see if they bounce back. But for Hayes, I do think the scoring is going to dip a little bit from where it was last year in Philadelphia. But we'll see. For Nashville, Nashville's new player of note. And again, I'm limiting myself to one player per team. As long as they have one, Vegas. But yeah, Ryan O'Reilly. So last year he had 30 points, and he's projected for 56 by the Hockey News. I see that number, and I think that's high. I think that's high, and I think for O'Reilly, I'm thinking more along the lines of 45. It's still a bounce back from last year, but again, with the Nashville Predators, are they going to be good? Are they not going to be good? Are they going to be able to score goals? And Ryan O'Reilly should get a lot of ice time, but I still think that 45, for me anyways, personally, I would say 45 over 56. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, because season hasn't started, so there are no wrong answers. All right, Minnesota. Minnesota did not add very much. They didn't, so I was stuck with Pat Maroon. I know. I know. And I double, triple checked. I went through, and Pat Maroon, last year he had 14 points. The Hockey News says 21 for Maroon. I'm going to be a Maroon booster. I'll say 24 points for Pat Maroon this year in Minnesota. Sure, why not? The one-man dynasty won 3 straight Stanley Cup rings. And, I mean, that's definitely something he can boast about. And we'll see whether or not he brings that luck to the Minnesota Wild. It'll be interesting to see how he does there. For Dallas, this one kind of surprised me a little bit, looking at the projection from the Hockey News. So I'm going to say straight out, I'm going to disagree a little bit. Duchesne, 56 points last year for Nashville. He's projected for 60. I think in Dallas and getting the right amount of ice time, Duchesne can hit 65. So I'm going to say 65 for Matt Duchesne. Getting onto a new team, and Dallas can score. So you're getting onto a team that can score, and coming off of a down year, Duchesne usually has bounce-back seasons. He's very up and down as a player. So we'll see whether or not that's the case with Duchesne, but as he continues his travels through the Central Division, we'll see, because he's been in Colorado, he's been in Nashville, now he's in Dallas, so likes the Central, clearly. We'll just forget about his foyer, his little dalliance into the East, of course. So Colorado, another former member of the Preds, Ryan Johansson. So Johansson last year, dealing with injuries, had 28 points. He's projected for 45 by the Hockey News. I'm going to say straight out, if he gets 45 points, that's not enough. They need more points production than that from Johansson. So I'll be on the optimistic side and say 50, although I still don't know if 50 is going to be what they want either. I think it'd be more in the 60 range, what would be what they're looking for from Johansson, considering that he may very well be locking down that second line center spot. And of course, he has to stay healthy to hit 50 or 60 or 45. Chicago, for Chicago, of course, they get Taylor Hall out of Boston. Taylor Hall never produces exactly as much as you think he should. Like, he always seems to produce a little bit less than you think he should. But last year, 36 points with the Bruins. He's projected for 58 by the Hockey News. I'm going to go with 52, though. I'm going to go with 52 because Chicago's going to have trouble with scoring outside of Bedard. Hall's going to get some points playing with Bedard, but there's not going to be any easy minutes out there. And so I'm going to say for Hall 52. That being said, if Bedard hits and ends up being above a point per game, Hall could end up in the 70-point range. I could see that as well. For Arizona, this is also a good chance for people who might have just been off hanging around, beaches all summer. Now it's September going, all right, what's going on with hockey? Yeah, Jason Zucker's with the Coyotes now. So last year he had 48 points. This year, the Hockey News thinks he's going to get 40. I'm going to go on the optimistic side again. I'm going to say Jason Zucker gets 50. I'm going to say Zucker gets a lot of ice time with some very talented players. He gets top 6 minutes with an Arizona team that may very well score more than people think. There should be 2 scoring lines. Zucker should be on one of them. I'll say 50 points. I'll say he keeps the 27 goals he had last year. And 23 assists sounds just as good as any other number. And so, or maybe he goes 30 goals, 20 assists, right? So I do think that Zucker should stay about the same in his production. Even though Arizona won't score the same as Pittsburgh did, he should be able to keep up his production. For Toronto, and I expect some disagreement on Tyler Bertuzzi and what he might be able to do. Honorable mention to Max Domi. Domi, I think, probably ends up around 50 points. So Bertuzzi had 30 points last year, projected for 51 by the Hockey News. It honestly, if he has 51, that's not enough. I'm going to say straight out that's not enough. I'll say 56. I'll go with 56 for Bertuzzi. And honestly, he needs to produce at a pretty good rate in order to warrant the amount of investment that Toronto's had and all of that as well. So we'll see, right? 56 points, I think, is reasonable. And again, at times in Detroit, it looked like he could get up around that point per game mark. And he played very well with Boston after the trade deadline move as well. If he can have anywhere near the chemistry in Toronto that he had in Boston, that 56 points is low. To be honest, that 56 points is low. Tampa Bay. So again, you may not have known Connor Sherry was part of the Tampa Bay Lightning now. He had 37 points last year. The Hockey News thinks 38. I'm going to come in on the low side here. I'll say 34 for Connor Sherry. Tampa Bay, though, definitely needs the production from Sherry. I'll say like 15 goals, 19 assists, somewhere in that region for Sherry. And so, yeah, I think, that's reasonable. That being said, Sherry can hit the 45-point range. He has that level of talent. I think he can. I'm not betting that he does. But again, you guys can let me know your thoughts. For Ottawa, see, I knew I was gonna grab the wrong marker at some point. When I'm switching markers up like that, it'll happen. Vlad Tarasenko, last year at 50 points. He's being projected for 56 by the Hockey News. That's pretty decent, realistic, but I'm going to come in on the low side and say 50. Tarasenko last year, I thought between his time in St. Louis and the Rangers, I did think he had lost a bit of a step. In Ottawa, we'll see whether or not that continues to be the case, whether or not he bounces back, but I'll say 50 points for Tarasenko. So again, I'm 6 points below, and I'm saying the same number of points for Tarasenko this year as last year. Once players in their 30s, usually that points production starts to really drop off. So keep that in mind when you're drafting guys. Are they 32 or older? You're probably looking at a drop off. If they're in that 29 to 31 range, again, it really depends on the conditioning of the player and teammates, line mates, all that fun stuff you have to keep an eye on too. For Montreal, well, it's got to be Alex Newhook, doesn't it? So I was a fan of Newhook's in Colorado. I really wanted him to, grasp that second line center spot. It never quite worked out. Last year he had 30 points. The Hockey News has him at 40. I guess I'm a little more gung-ho on Newhook. I'll say 46 for Newhook. I think that Newhook has a lot of talent. And again, some of these players will benefit from a change of scenery. For Newhook, he'll have more responsibility with Montreal than he had in Colorado. He'll get more special teams time than he did in Colorado. And so again, as long as he can avoid any kind of injury, Newhook should produce a lot more. For Florida, so this is an interesting one because it really shows how a change of venue for a player, I think, can make a big difference. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, the expectations were probably too high in Vancouver, and that contract was cumbersome. So last year, he produces 22 points for Vancouver. The projection from the Hockey News is 29. I think Ekman-Larsson's going to get more ice time with the injuries to Ekblad and Montour to start the season. I think Ekman-Larsson could produce at a decent rate, I'll say through the first 10 to 15 games of the year. And so instead of 29, I'm going to say 35. I think he can get back up to 35 points over the full season. Now, 20 points of that may very well be in that first month and a half if he gets off to a good start because, again, being out of Vancouver, going to Florida where you've got a team that can score, Ekman-Larsson could get off to a really strong start this year. I do not expect he would stay there, thus saying 35 points instead of going as high as 40 or 50. But in Florida where you can score points, Ekman-Larsson, I think, is still going to be capable of that. I'm not saying he gets his game back to where it was in his heyday in Arizona, but I do think he can score 35 points on a Florida team that, yeah, they're pretty solid offensively. For Detroit, another Alex. What is it with Alex moving around this year? Seems like it's a lot of Alexes. Alex DeBrincat. So DeBrincat last year had 66 points. The Hockey News is saying 68. I guess I'm a little more of an optimist with DeBrincat. I'll say 73 points for Alex DeBrincat. He needs to score 30 to 35 goals, I would say, at a minimum. And I would say he can hit 40. It does depend on who his center is and the kind of chemistry he has with said center. Of course, I would say that goes without saying, but you never know. You got to kind of say it, and because there may very well be other arguments out there. But I will say for DeBrincat, the 1 year in Ottawa wasn't as bad as I think it was played out to be. But I also don't think Ottawa's going to miss him as much as some people seem to think when they look at the team from last year and then project out this year. I'm not saying that the trade for DeBrincat ended up working out really, really well for Ottawa when you look at what they got back. But they used some of that money they saved. They signed Tarasenko. We'll see how it turns out for them. And again, if DeBrincat gets 73 in Detroit, and Tarasenko gets 50 in Ottawa. But then you've got Kubalik there as well. Then there's the argument of, does the reality that the two players in Ottawa score more points and goals than DeBrincat does on his own, does that mean that it offsets that loss? Yeah, we'll see if it does or if it doesn't. For Buffalo, not a lot here with Buffalo for offense. So I'm going to say Connor Clifton could be gold for your fantasy league if you're grading with hits. If hits are included, Connor Clifton should hit 200 hits. And in Buffalo last year, they really didn't like hitting. So Clifton is a sign that Kevin Adams saw that and decided to make a change. So the points production last year in Boston, he had 23 points. The projection from the Hockey News is 16. I think that's low. I think Clifton can hit 20 points in Buffalo. He's not going to be a fantasy mainstay offensively, but again, defensively with the body checking, he can shot block as well. Clifton may very well be popular for some if the stats that their fantasy league uses to decide who's winning and losing includes shot blocking and hits as well. Clifton's really a solid defensive option there. If Boston had the cap space, Clifton's still in Boston. I'll put it that way. Speaking of Boston, another player people may not be aware has moved to Boston, and that's James Van Riemsdyk. So to close out the Atlantic, James Van Riemsdyk had 29 points last year for the Philadelphia Flyers. They're projecting 37 for Van Riemsdyk. I don't know. It's going to have to be special teams time. I don't know if I can get to 37. I'm going to say 30 for James Van Riemsdyk. I just don't know if he's going to have a resurgence at this stage in his career. I don't know if 29 to 37 points qualifies as a resurgence, but I'm basically saying I expect the production to be about the same. I think he'll score more goals than assists, and I think he'll get special teams time probably on that second power play unit for Boston. So now we get into the final division, and for Washington, of course, with Max Pacioretty, always check whether or not he's healthy. Max Pacioretty played 5 games last year and had 3 goals in those 5 games. He's projected for 43 points by the Hockey News. I'm guessing they're factoring in the injury issues and all of that. I will be a little more optimistic with Pacioretty, and I'll square him off to 50 points. That would require him to play, I'll say, 75 games. So, we'll see. But I'll say Pacioretty stays healthy and scores 50 points because I like to be optimistic. For Pittsburgh, obviously it's going to be Erik Karlsson. Erik Karlsson had 101 points last year. The Hockey News is projecting 77 for Karlsson, but they were projecting that when he was in San Jose. I'll say in Pittsburgh, 85 points. My guess is the Hockey News, if he had been traded to Pittsburgh before that fantasy yearbook was put out, they would have put him at about 85 as well. That's my guess anyways. I don't think he has another 100-point season, but he's going to be very good. I would think 20 goals, probably pretty likely. So 20 goals, 65 assists, that sounds about right. And that should also keep guys like Crosby and Malkin up above that point per game mark too. Crosby may very well be a dark horse to get back to 100 points, in part because he'll have Karlsson, he'll have Letang on the point. He's going to get fed some pretty decent passes. For Philadelphia, so not a lot added for Philadelphia. Sean Walker, who at one point in his career I thought, there was a lot of potential there offensively. It really hasn't turned out that way. 13 points for him last season, projected for 16 by the Hockey News. And I'll go above it just for the sake of going above it and say 18 points for Walker. He's not going to be a big points producer, but he's a decent addition for them on the blue line. He's a good third-pairing defenseman at this stage, and we'll see whether or not Philly's defensive numbers get any better this year. For the New York Rangers, it's kind of got to be Blake Wheeler. So Blake Wheeler should be happy to be in a new environment now and get a chance to prove himself all over again. Last year he had 55 points, projections 59 from the Hockey News. I'm going to go the other direction. Because he's in his mid-30s, I'll put 50. I'll say 50 points for Wheeler. I think that's a decent total. I don't think the Rangers are going to be upset with 50. So I'm about 10 points below where the Hockey News has him. But again, we shall see which one ends up being closer to accurate. For the New York Islanders, not a lot of offense added by the Islanders either. So for the New York Islanders, I'm writing down Julien Gauthier, depth forward, who last year had 14 points, projected for 21 by the Hockey News. And I'm going to go ahead and say 21 sounds about right, but just to be different, I'll say 17. He's going to get fourth line minutes. Maybe he ends up being the 13th forward at points too. I'll say 17 for Julien Gauthier. For the New Jersey Devils, obviously the biggest addition for them is Tyler Toffoli. Now, I think the Hockey News is harsh on this one. 73 points last year for Toffoli. I don't expect that from him this year. Hockey News breaks him down to 56, which is getting more towards his average over the last few years. I think playing in that offensive up-tempo style for New Jersey, I think he'll hit. I'm going with 65. I think Toffoli's capable of 65 points. Again, he had 73 last year for Calgary. We know New Jersey's a more explosive offensive team than Calgary. 65 may end up being low as well. But I would not be surprised to see him with more goals than assists and getting close to 40 goals and having about 25 assists. So I could see that being the way those totals work out. Keep in mind, there are also fantasy leagues where the goals are given more weight than the assists and just general in points too. So if your league values goals more, Toffoli may very well be your pick. For Columbus, so there's a couple of defensemen they picked up. I decided to use Provorov on this board. Ivan Provorov last year had 27 points. They're projecting 31 for him. I'm going to go ahead and project 36. I think that Provorov, with a change of scenery, could very well be a solid option for Columbus. And if they find the right defense partner for him, this could be an absolutely huge move. Of course, Matt Niskanen was his defense partner in his best year in Philly. If they can find the right defense partner for him in Columbus and get him back to that form, they get a steal this summer is what they get. For Carolina, so to round this out, Michael Bunting. So Bunting, I mentioned him with the penalty minutes video, of course, where I was talking about penalty minutes and points, guys who produce both. For Bunting, last year he had 49 points with Toronto. He's projected for 46 by the Hockey News. Carolina doesn't score as much as Toronto, and I don't know if Bunting's going to be given as many opportunities to score as he did in Toronto. So, yeah, 46 is the projection from the Hockey News. I'll go with 42. I'll go with 42 for Bunting. He can hit 50 plus. But again, part of what we're going to see this year too is, will the scoring in the NHL keep going up? Are we going to see more goals or are we going to see fewer? There you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.